to switch gears. So over the past 2 days, we've covered a lot of the latest science. We've looked at current trends. We've mined the data to see what people are interested in. And for our final 2 sessions today, we're going to help you build your success toolkit. We're going to offer actionable strategies to help you grow your business and help you best serve your consumers who we know are very interested in this category. So please welcome Noah now. He's the Managing Director of GenBiome Consulting, and he's going to be talking about leveraging microbiome product innovation to remain competitive as retail health evolves. Noah, I will turn it over to you now.
Thanks so much, Maggie. I really appreciate you inviting me. And thanks, Len and Tracy, for thinking of me as well. And Tim, for all your help with kind of some of the pre-production support. So Maggie, can I just share my screen?
Yep, you can share your screen.
Amazing.
And I'll let you know if we're seeing it okay once you get that up.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. All right. Can you see it okay, Maggie? Perfect.
We can see it and you can take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to speak to you. This is an area that I'm really passionate about. And while it's a little bit more geared towards kind of understanding things for the retailer community that's listening in, I definitely do think it applies to any of the registered dietitians, in-store nutritionists, health coaches that might be listening. And then there will still be a little bit on the science and kind of the science of the products that I'll be touching upon, as well as some of the macro trends. So it'll definitely appeal to everyone. Just real quick, for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm the Managing Director of GenBiome Consulting. We're a boutique consulting practice that specializes in these 5 areas. Have been in the space, microbiome space, probably for the last 7 or so years, and have branched out as personalization and other trends have started to grow. These are kind of some of the core focus areas that we really specialize in supporting brands of all levels, as well as the venture community and private equity. So what I want to talk to you about are 4 key concepts, starting with kind of the macro. What is the environment, and what is the environment today, and what's going to be the environment probably over the next 3 to 5 years? It might be impacting some of the microbiome innovation, as well as some of the changes in retail health, which I think for the smaller retailers is going to make it a little bit more challenging to compete with the larger incumbents like the Walmarts, the Krogers, and the Amazon, and so forth. So it's going to start from the 30,000 foot view and kind of start moving into very specific categories, which I think align with retailers well, which is food and beverage. And I know the previous speakers touched upon some of those trends, and so there'll be a little bit overlap, but I'm going to make it more case study focused with some clients that I've worked with. And then supplement innovators, and then kind of where's the microbiome and digital health moving. And the great thing is the 2 companies that I'm going to feature today, I actually got to meet with their CEOs yesterday at another conference. So diving into kind of the macro factors. So I think everyone knows that in America we have kind of a general big health crisis. And the things I really want to point out here, and I don't want to go through each stat, the thing I really want to point out here is that we're going to have a 9% or almost 10% year-over-year increase in healthcare costs, and our healthcare spending in the U.S. is 4.1 trillion. And so that is a huge amount of money that right now is solely siloed in kind of the traditional healthcare channels and health systems. On top of that, when you think about what conditions are really kind of driving, some of the cost increases, a lot of it is going to be focused around metabolic conditions, metabolic dysregulation, and at the core of it, really kind of the trends in diabetes and pre-diabetes. So something to keep in mind. There's also not only a substantial pool of money that is available to essentially be taken by other channels, but there's also some really impactful legislation that's been happening over the last 4 years. And that has to do with the Chronic Care Act of 2018. And why is that important, especially to retailers? Well, it's starting to pave the way for food to be reimbursed as medicine. And this is like a quick timeline that kind of walks you through some of the key things that have been happening from a legislative and a reimbursement perspective. And I'll touch upon that a little bit more in the presentation. But again, you're starting to see these foundational shifts, which are unlocking that $4.1 trillion pool of cash specifically related to food. So this is kind of a little cartoon infographic I made. And the whale is really the healthcare and the metabolic health sector. And what I'm trying to show is that everyone is trying to essentially, capture the whale. And there's a bunch of different stakeholders. And the one thing that I want to key on is, really kind of in the middle is kind of where are the smaller retailers? And by smaller, I mean, co-ops, more of the independents, the non-Kroger, the non-Walmart, the non-Albertson level, type of retailers. I think it's really important to start thinking about what your retail health strategy is going to be, because consumers are going to consistently be looking for ways to interact in much more simple, approachable cash pay ways as they go to the grocery store. And they're going to start seeing that messaging increase. And they might start wondering, well, why doesn't one of my smaller local, grocers have some of these services? Because it would make my life easier just going to a one-stop shop. But it also shows you to some degree a little bit how daunting it is from a competitive perspective, which I'll touch upon in the next slide. So that 4.1 trillion figure I mentioned, the reason why that's really important to understand is, and why all of these other sectors are really keen into healthcare, it has to do with stock price appreciation. And it has to do with the ability to drive continued revenue growth from a top line. And so what you see here is kind of a off the cuff using publicly available data, the total revenues in 2021 of the three sectors that have most heavily invested in retail health and have the biggest vested interest in trying to create some holistic platform that probably does include food as medicine to some component. And, imagine if they were able to siphon off a portion of that $4.1 trillion. This is why they're moving into these spaces. And even just for metabolic health solutions alone, it could potentially be a 33% year over year, total increase in the entire revenue category across these three. So we know that government has a huge pool of money. We know that they're setting the stage for food as medicine, for preventative versus reactive strategies with the Chronic Care Act of 2018. We know that some of the biggest players, from tech to grocery to retail health, are moving into the space. But what are consumers wanting? There's a few really good stats here, I think both from a domestic and a global perspective, to show that there's a huge market for this. And the one thing that I want to get across is that, when you look at kind of the wealthiest, demographic from a family perspective in America household, there's about 12 million of those. And if you just do a simple off the cuff, kind of math, calculation, what I'm wanting to get across is it's actually, while you have all of these very large competitive stakeholders trying to plant their flag in retail health, it is not as daunting and unapproachable. If you can just siphon off 1%, from some of the companies I've seen that have scaled, roughly about a 1%, penetration of the 12 million households could lead you to get to about $100 million ARR business. So that's something to think about as we talk about some of these specific companies that I'll feature later. This is just some snapshots to show you kind of who's doing what and how real it is. I think Walmart and CVS and Walgreens are probably the furthest ahead. And again, Walmart is really trying to, vertically integrate everything. You can see here that they're already doing very inexpensive testing in some of their stores. This is in Dallas, Georgia. You can see that they're really understanding that there's 35 million uninsured Americans, and they're thinking about using their super centers essentially as a primary care point. And also they're looking to, partner with insurance services to get more and more of this, again, reimbursed, siphon off some of that 4.1 trillion, and really vertically integrate by controlling the diagnostic testing as well. So rather than partnering out with some testing companies, they're looking to do it all in-house. This is just like a quick key capabilities matrix for people to look at to kind of see the landscape. Again, you can see, Walmart and CVS are pretty built out. But the one thing I do want to point out is Kroger. And from a pure grocery store standpoint, the thing that I think is very interesting about them is, they've launched, this tele and retail health capability through their Little Clinic. They actually have metabolic health programs. I believe they have the largest nationwide coverage of in-store dietitians. And the biggest unlock, I think, is they've been very forward thinking as far as the deployment of data, and particularly proprietary data. And so what they're doing is they're actually able to look at, if you go to Kroger, any of the Kroger brands, and you get a prescription, they have your data on all your kind of prescribing history. But then they also have all of your shopping data. So imagine if you're, a type 2 diabetic or have some sort of condition where a food as medicine approach can be integrated. If you're getting, insulin or metformin, but you're still buying Oreos, they might be able to then start nudging you to say, hey, we noticed you just picked up your insulin. How about you go buy some apples? How about you go buy some stuff with high fiber, with prebiotics, with probiotics, so that to me is really compelling. I think Walmart and CVS and Walgreens are all wanting to move in those directions. But from what I've seen so far, Kroger seems to be the farthest along. And then what I wanted to highlight here is kind of a thesis that I've been socializing, within the food and VMS community, that these digital health companies that have raised a substantial amount of money are starting to move along their revenue adjacency because they're needing to basically justify valuation, or if they went public, basically top line revenue growth. And so Everlywell recently launched their own supplement line. And something that was really interesting yesterday in getting to meet the SVP of innovation for Nestle is she talked about the rise of private label being very, very large as a big trend that they're looking at. And so, again, this is a private label product. So rather than somebody going into, the supplement aisle and buying a branded product, from one of the key, large VMS companies or consumer health companies, because of the ability to get really high quality ingredients now, these companies are starting to launch their own lines and have pretty significant cash and total revenue. So, remember I touched upon the food as medicine movement and basically how in 2018 it was kind of the watershed first domino of kind of, starting that cascade. And so these are the current reimbursed food programs in companies. And I think the most amazing thing is in 2018, the former FDA commissioner really kind of spoke about the power of food as medicine, which I think is pretty rare for someone in his position, given the majority of their focus has been on drug, which is much more reactive. And so there's really three modalities for kind of layering in food as medicine, which would really apply, I think, to retailers. One is medically tailored meals. So that means, everything is like, for the most part, very customized, usually focused towards a condition and a person. Medically tailored groceries, which is something that Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield is doing with Kroger to offer certain plan members like anywhere from $75 to $200, I think, dollars a month. And you can see Walmart's doing some stuff as well as United Healthcare. And that's basically where you get, a piggy bank of cash. You have like a good list and a bad list of food. So you can't just go to the store and buy like beer and Snickers or champagne. Sorry. But you have this pool of cash that incentivizes you to buy healthy things. And then food pharmacies, which is, something that Geisinger, which is, one of the largest, most progressive health systems in America, has pioneered. They have, actual physical locations, in the Northeast, like in the Pennsylvania area, predominantly, I think, and people that are identified through their, patients group basically have access to be able to go in and get healthy foods for free. So this food as medicine movement is really evolving. Not only is there Season Health, but there's companies like Sunbasket, Performance Kitchen. There's a ton that are starting to really try and capture that. Now, a lot of this might seem really daunting, and, it's going to require potentially build out to have a retail health environment, in a smaller retailer, which could potentially be outside of the scope of your budget and your innovation, spend CapEx capability. So I wanted to highlight something that could be like really approachable from an integration to start. And so Higgy is basically the reimagining of, kind of that blood pressure cuff kiosk that maybe, some of us remember going to, in the Rite Aids, the CVSs, the Walgreens of the world when we were kids. but it's much more now, and they're going to be rolling out additional biometric capabilities in store. They have 10,000 stations across the country. Again, while they're very focused in more of the traditional retailers like the Krogers and the Publix of the world, you know, who's to say if you reach out to them and want to put one in the store, they wouldn't be opposed to it. And I think the interesting thing here is that, you know, Giant Eagle rolled out, you know, a virtual personalized vitamin aisle using Higgy and using a company called Vu Vitamins. And so again, there's opportunities to potentially, you know, monetize in a very approachable. You don't need a large retail footprint of space to, you know, cater and say that you have a tentpole retail health opportunity, you know, for your customers, and then be able to help point them in store basically through this screen here and through custom other surveying that they can do on the kiosk to drive, you know, kind of health outcomes, better for you choices and all of that. So now that we kind of understand the macro environment, I want to shift gears to really understanding how the microbiome specifically and different product categories in the microbiome can be leveraged to help, you know, build out a retail health strategy, a better for you, a food as medicine approach. And so we'll start with the food and beverage space, just because I think it's the most approachable for everyone to kind of think about. And we eat food and drink beverages quite a bit. Some of this stuff might have been touched upon in the last session, but prebiotics and fiber is a gigantic, massively growing microbiome ingredient, and it's really kind of shifting some key categories. One in which is the beverage category. And so I kind of, you know, broke out the stats between the digestive health set and then some beverage category stats. And I think two of the biggest ones that I bolded at the top is that 26% of all category growth is driven by prebiotic product companies, while only making up about 3% of the total products offered. So you're seeing, you know, these companies are really punching above their weight, and they're contributing a substantial amount of revenue to the set. And then on the higher fiber beverage side of things, you basically have over almost 400% year over year growth and a significant amount of like contribution revenue margin to the category, which I think is really powerful. And, you know, on the beverage side, specifically within the digestive health set, you know, beverages, you know, the majority of the ones that are launching, I've seen, are choosing a prebiotic approach versus a probiotic approach in their formulation. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One, I think they're copying category builders in one of the companies I'll touch upon in the next slide. But also there's a huge fiber gap in America. And we know that the lack of fiber not only affects the microbiome, but it affects, you know, metabolic health related conditions. It affects digestive health, you know, situations. And so it's something I think consumers are starting to realize and want a more approachable way than just taking Metamucil. Oops. So the first brand I want to highlight is Olipop. Full disclosure, I work with Olipop, but you know, I think this is a really an important category and product to highlight for two reasons. One, because we have a massive sugar sweetened beverage addiction in America and a massive soda addiction, and there currently hasn't been really an approachable off ramp. And for those of you that haven't tried Olipop, you know, to me, it does really taste like soda, but it doesn't have any of the bad. So you have like 2 to 5 grams of sugar, 9 grams of plant-based fiber, botanicals, prebiotics. It really is disrupting the digestive health set. It's supporting the growth of the digestive health set pretty much on the back of Olipop, from what I understand. And, you know, they have quite a large reach, and actually the natural and organic grocers are some of their key accounts. Sprouts has been an exceptional partner of Olipop. You know, I know PCC in the North, you know, Pacific Northwest, the brand does really well there, as well as some of the broader kind of health food stores. And actually, it's, to my knowledge, it's the only functional soda that's actually done research on their entire formulation to power their claims. So not just from a single ingredient that they're putting into the can, but looked at the holistic formulation as well. The other company I want to highlight right now is only sold D2C. Who knows if they'll move into retail in the future, but they started with a single SKU, which is a combination of a powder, prebiotic, and vitamin mix called their Gut Goodness shake. And then they've kind of expanded into stick packs with fiber and a bar. And really they're targeting kind of the metabolic health and glycemic management angle with that. I think doing a really good job of socializing, again, the importance of more prebiotics and fiber. And again, something, each of these categories from powders to stick pack to bars are hugely growing and could essentially potentially be another complementary way to get people, to support their metabolic and gut health. The third company I want to talk about, I just got introduced to them pretty recently. And I think this is really important because I didn't know how many women in America daily have digestive health issues, whether it's related to FODMAP, IBS, or other kind of like GI conditions and potentially partially a lot of stress. And so there's really no approachable kind of food snacking options that allow them to be on the go and eat things that they feel good about. They're an earlier stage company, obviously looking for retail partners, are currently sold DTC. They're Monash certified for, being low FODMAP. And they're actually doing some really disruptive stuff as far as promotion and socializing. I think they put a billboard up somewhere in an iconic part of Los Angeles, like basically showing that, I think they called it the hot girls of IBS, to basically show like, this is not a stigma. This is not, something that is just applies to, a certain demographic of humans, that it's everyone. And it's people that you might not even think, have IBS or have FODMAP issues or have daily digestive health issues. So again, I think with each one of these brands, you're seeing a high level of approachability, which I think is going to be a huge driver to conversion and to keeping people on some of these products. And then the last company is called Panaceutics, and they're more kind of a behind the scenes B2B company. But when you kind of think about being able to produce personalized solutions truly down to N of 1 and layering in whether it's just a questionnaire, a genetic or a microbiome test or a blood test or urine test, they really have the ability to do not only like smaller production scale stuff to meet, smaller test and learn, opportunities, but then they have a very large scale, high throughput manufacturing facility. I would say the one catch is the format is constricted to more of this kind of like pouch format, which could kind of like limit broad-based appeal. But I think it is something that's interesting, and you're starting to see more of like these pouch-based on-the-go nutrition snacks not only appeal to kids and maybe the elderly, but also to parents. And one other thing that was interesting from talking to the SVP and hearing her presentation from Nestle was she was saying that families are wanting to find one snacking on the go solution that fits the entire family's needs. And so I think they even highlighted something of a similar product format. So that's something I think to think about as you start to build out your microbiome and kind of retail health, food as medicine set. So shifting now to microbiome supplement innovators, and I'm sure there's a ton, but there's just two I want to focus on for time. One is Biome Health. They started kind of DTC. They really built out the complementary side of the microbiome called the mycobiome, which has to do with the fungal biome. It doesn't get as much attention as the bacteria, but it plays a huge role in kind of our digestive health and actually influences bacterial communities. And there's a lot of kind of like back and forth interaction. And so again, they have like a super greens product, they have some encapsulated stuff, but they also have a gut health test. And they're starting to branch out into more of a B2B white label, which could again be something that's interesting for retail to marry, a test plus a product. They've done some stuff with standard process, which I heard is doing really well. And they also have, I think the test could be something that in-store health coaches could combine. So a lot of opportunities there. The other company is Seed. Again, full disclosure, I've worked with Seed formerly as the head of external innovation and doing consulting for them now. They have two products, solely DTC. They did do a pilot in Erewhon. I'm not sure if they're going to do broader retail pilots, but again, when you think about reputation, brand awareness, science pedigree, Seed is definitely, if not the top, one of the top in the probiotic space. And they just launched a pediatric symbiotic. And, for those consumers that not only want something that works, but also has kind of a sustainability perspective, that is a core ethos and design element that's woven into the company's, manufacturing and product development process. So now moving towards kind of digital health innovators. And this is where I think it could be most approachable from a food as medicine, and integrating essentially, all of the SKUs in your grocery store and your retail environment to then help, your customers figure out what's best for them. So the first company is called January. They basically pair a CGM, uses a substantial amount of AI, and the AI in their algorithm has been basically developed through some of the most groundbreaking research from the labs of Stanford's Justin Sonnenberg, who is really one of the top KOLs in the microbiome space, and then Michael Schneider, who is one of the top cardiometabolic experts using multi-omic technology to really understand a lot of granularity around what influences glycemic response. And so they actually did a pilot in Best Buy. So I'm sure they're open to more, retail partnerships. And in hearing the talk from their CEO yesterday, they're really going to be pushing out a next generation version that's going to have a lot of specificity around creating something called a digital twin, which I won't get into too much, but think about like having like almost like a digital avatar of yourself that you could say, hey, what if I ate this pizza right now? What would it do to my blood sugar? What would it do to my HbA1c? Or even to the effect they're able to say, how much time would I have to spend exercising to shunt the metabolic effects of me eating this pizza or this donut? Or what if I ate this salad? So they have some really powerful technology that comes to bear. They can integrate, wearable data, and they're going to also layer on a microbiome test. The other company is Longevity, which is now owned by Thorne Health Tech. It was developed in collaboration. The co-founders were Chris Mason and Joel Dudley, again, like preeminent scientists from the microbiome, big data in their own domains. They allow you to have both a DTC test, which is sold via Thorne, but they also have a B2B platform as well. And they have some 2D printing of these kind of like nutritional disc capabilities. So I could definitely see something where this could be deployed again in a retail environment. They're very partner centric, as you can see here. So again, something to think about. And the other thing that I think is interesting is their ability to look at biological age. Healthy aging, I know, is one of the key functional areas that's top of mind. There's relationships to the microbiome. And again, from a data set and an algorithm development perspective, they publish multiple papers. I think their minimum, like one of their largest cohorts is 10,000 people, which is pretty unheard of for a lot of these digital health companies. So thank you so much for your attention and your time. I really appreciate it and look forward to your questions.
Excellent, thank you. Really interesting to think about. We were talking about with the avatar. Just imagine me telling myself not to eat the pizza. That's quite the future we're in for.
Yeah.
So speaking about the future, personalization, obviously, consumers are very interested in it. They don't want to spend their money on things that they're not sure if they're working. So this is a great way to help them target. And we discussed this at length during a Naturally Informed event in 2021, so over a year ago. And at that time, the experts really stressed that it's a great tool to have in your toolbox, but it's important to kind of manage consumer expectations. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that and where we stand now.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it really comes, I think there's two things to think about. One is the so what now what problem. And so it's like you do all of this, you get your report, and most of the time, the consumer is basically left looking at the report and trying to interpret it themselves. And I think the companies have gotten a little bit better as far as trying to explain, what's what. But as far as true actionability where it's personalized, I think that's where the disconnect has been actually having a health coach walk you through it. And so I think that's an important point to figure out how to approachably integrate it into your life that's going to drive actual behavioral change. And so that kind of concept of pairing a health coach with the behavioral change element, I think, is starting to become more top of mind with a lot of these companies. I think the other thing to think about is data privacy, and then also what I call data labor, meaning like how much work do you have to put in to be able to actively use these platforms to benefit your health. And I think from a data labor perspective, after you do this test, if you have this platform and you want to integrate into your life, one of the most challenging things, even for me, is inputting all my foods to then see how it responds. So there's, again, companies that are developing simpler, machine learning, computer vision technology using AI, using our cell phones to be able to almost differentiate and say, they can even get down to differentiating applesauce versus hummus, which is really hard from a technical perspective. But I think once we move to more of the photo-based options, it's going to make compliance and adoption a lot better.
Interesting. And you mentioned privacy, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit more, because when you were talking about Kroger and the data collection, I think it's fascinating. And actually in our keynote this morning, we asked Dr. Robin Chutkin about what she'd like to see from industry. And one thing was that she said she'd really like to see talking about diet and lifestyle involved more. So Kroger's really making an effort to do that. But I'm also thinking, like, as a consumer, they're like, you bought Oreos.
Yeah.
How are people responding to this? I mean, are we really seeing a shift where people are more open, and are there data privacy concerns?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I can share from my understanding is that whenever these companies use the data, it's, for the most part, it's de-identified. And obviously they don't share it outside of their ecosystem for a few reasons. One, they want to start monetizing their own ecosystems, which probably doesn't make Nielsen spins and Clearcut very happy. But so there's that. And then also, obviously I think they know that the success of being able to leverage that data candidly to probably monetize it and to get consumers to interact with it is going to be predicated on trust. And so, to my knowledge, I haven't heard of any breaches in data. I haven't seen any backlash or heard of any backlash similar to what Google got when they did the Project Nightingale with Ascension Health, and nobody at Ascension that was a patient or a member knew about it until after the fact. So far, I think it's been good, but I think it's something that, the retailers need to responsibly communicate to their customers to say, hey, we're collecting this data. Would you like to opt in or opt out? I think would be important. And I also think the ability to make your data portable in the same way that you can download your 23andMe data and use it however you want, because technically it's yours and you own it, I think is going to be a little bit of attention and something that'll be interesting to see evolve over time.
Absolutely. Getting into a little bit more about the practical steps, you touched on Seed and the pilot program that they did in retail. Can you tell us more about what that looked like?
Yeah. I mean, I think they reached out to, or they had a relationship with the Erewhon folks. Erewhon, for those of you who don't know about the retailer, the grocery store, is really it's kind of like this really unique place in Los Angeles. And I think they're expanding it to other parts of the country. But it's very much a place where forward-thinking brands, go to almost have some of their first retail experiences. One of Olipop's first, major champions, and still to this day is a huge champion, is Erewhon. And so you also then get the other retailers going to Erewhon to kind of see what's up and coming and what's cool. So I think there was a lot of kind of thought process and calculus there. And then what they were wanting to do is basically somebody could go in, you could buy Seed, there in the store. And then I think what they wanted to do was then drive you to subscription directly through Seed. So I think that's what they were trying to drive. Seed really wants, ultimately to try and have as much of a touch point with the customer as possible. And who knows if they'll kind of expand upon that kind of concept in the future.
So the win for Erewhon was they're getting people into the store. They can then show them, more of the healthy offerings that they have. So kind of a win-win.
So I don't know about the financial relationship because I didn't work too much on that when I was at Seed. But I imagine my hunch is Erewhon probably got some sort of, obviously, not only by getting people into the store, but then also probably, made profit on the sale of Seed as well.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I was just wondering how it plays out there.
Yeah.
So we do have questions coming in. Everybody, please put your questions into the Q&A box, and we do have some time for questions. So take advantage of this time that we have. Just a technical question here, Noah, on the stats on category growth from prebiotics. Note that they were fascinating, and just a question on how those were calculated.
So those came from some proprietary data sources, basically aggregating some proprietary data sources that I had access to.
Okay, another question here. This is a great one. Really interested in your perspective here, in terms of helping the retailers. And obviously there are so many products to choose from, so much innovation. What criteria should retailers use when deciding which microbiome products they bring in? And specifically, how can they avoid those that are just jumping on the bandwagon versus those, as you were talking about, actually clinically substantiated on the product? So we'll start with that part for the retailers.
Yeah, great question, because I think it's one thing that I talked to Len about, on the prebiotic side, which is being a good steward of the category. So for retailers, I think you want to ask, like, hey, does the company have any legitimate scientists that have agreed to be on a research advisory board or a scientific advisory board? Because those people are very reputationally sensitive. And if they are there, it means they're there because they believe in what's happening at the company usually. Two, I would, ask, like, what type of work have you done? If you have a single ingredient, what type of data, human data, clinical trial data, obviously, that substantiates what you're saying. If you have a formulated product, the better option is to test the entire formulation's effect in whatever, health claim you're wanting to make. I would also look at their kind of supply chain, like how clean is the supply chain? Because how clean is the ingredient, nutrition facts panel is another one. And I would also ask, for the ones that are more testing focused, like how much data have you developed internally to build your algorithm versus just going to PubMed and, looking at a bunch of papers and then kind of deciding what you think that the algorithm should be. And so it's really about methodically training that algorithm. So it really comes down to the science, and it comes down to, like-minded credibility and KOLs that have aligned themselves. And then I would say the last thing is to have probably the people in the store test it out, and kind of look at the social media, and kind of poke around and see what consumers are saying about the product. Do they feel good about it? Do they recommend it? Is there pushback? Has there been anything negative said? And if so, why and what that is?
Yeah, it's a great tip. There's so much out there online that we can see. Second part of this question was, how can brands differentiate in this space?
Yeah, the challenge is there's a lot of Me Too innovation from what I've seen. And I think you really saw it at Expo West this last year. I think the way to innovate is to think about what is the true problem that you're solving, whether it's a health problem or a consumer problem. And then I would say the second part is if you're trying to innovate in a category that's ultimately going to be better for you, does it actually taste like the thing that you're trying to get people to switch away from? And you have to be real honest with yourself. Like, it's, to some degree, I think it's a little bit easier to find the gaps in what needs to be added to the American diet in an approachable way. And it's a lot harder to be very good at flavor formulation and sensory formulation. And I would say the third thing is, I joke with a lot of the fastest growth, like emerging growth brands, that they happen to be content companies that also sell a product versus a product company that develops content. They're some of the best at content development that I've ever seen. And so really having a strong content, creation capability that shows your value proposition is extremely important. And then the third thing is, if you want to be kind of a thought leader in a certain category, maybe joining an industry trade group that aligns with that type of ingredient or functional health area. because it provides you not only access to other, like-minded people, but it shows that you're committed to being a good steward of the category.
Yeah, it's excellent. And you actually are helping me queue up on my next session, which
Cool.
we have a few more minutes
Great.
here, but we're going to move on to talking to some of the representatives from the industry organizations. And we're specifically going to be talking about communicating and looking at marketing and reaching the consumers in a responsible but also resonating way. So we'll hear more about what you were just saying there. So thank you for that. Another question here about the technology. So like I said at the start here, you're really talking about some things that sound pretty cool sci-fi, but when like looking ahead, when are we actually going to see these things in a retail space where we're just walking to the store and this is becoming more common? Any idea of that?
I mean, you're seeing it now. I mean, January, you can buy it in Best Buy. I don't know about Thorne, but I mean, there's, I think Walmart, CVS, they devote certain parts of their stores to actually having genetic tests and other type of tests there. I know Hims, which is, a digital health company, is partnering with the Walmarts of the world. So you're starting to see it now. And as far as it being actionable and usable, I mean, it's 100% actionable and usable, today. You could go to any of these companies' websites, buy the test, they'll send you the CGM or not. So I think it's in the nearer term than we all think. And I think part of it, though, is really about the retailers realizing the value that not only helps their customer, but also allows them to keep people coming back in the store and show why they as a brand, as a grocery or a retail brand, have value in the consumer's life. So that's, again, something to think about, but it's happening now. There's partnerships and so, yeah.
Excellent. Question here about compliance. There's a long-term compliance problem and an opportunity for microbiome products. You need the long-term to make these changes, and this makes them, huge lifetime value for any brand and retail. Do you have any novel strategies for compliance that you see or that you wish you saw? And for example, how do we get consumers on board with that long-term compliance?
Yeah, so I think overall it's going to depend on the product format, and it's going to depend on kind of the functional health category. But I would say holistically, compliance is going to be a function of engagement and how do you keep somebody engaged. And so that's why all of these digital health companies, like the Januaries, the Thorns, and others, they're starting to layer on health coaching is a part of it. And they're actually having, like, some of them have their own app where there's like chat capabilities. So you can like just take a picture of your food and say, hey, I'm thinking about eating this. Should I do it or should I not? And, during normal working hours, these health coaches are pretty good about responding pretty quickly. So I think almost like having, this virtual health coach on your shoulder leads to, stickiness and people wanting to stick on these programs. From, more, I think, of a supplement or a true food and beverage perspective, that's where I think content really matters, and developing content in ways that the consumer can interact is incredibly important. And from the personalized supplement side of things, it's really about almost having before and after testing. So to almost message to people from the beginning, like, hey, we're going to give you a microbiome test to start. We're going to give you a product and what we think based on our tests and our data says you need. In 3 months, or 6 months, we're going to give you one more test to show and to check that what we recommended is working. And if not, we'll have the chance to maybe make some adjustments. Maybe a few of the things are working. Maybe we need to add in a couple different things. So I think the testing can be used as a retention tool to show before and after benefits or effects, or the opportunity to make some shifts for things that maybe didn't hit the mark.
Excellent. We have another question that came in, and I'm smiling because I love this question. So you're helping us stay on the cutting edge right now. You're keeping us informed with all these great insights, but how do you stay informed on the market? Any recommendations for sources that we should all be monitoring?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, stuff like this is a great place, shameless plug. But NutraIngredients, McKinsey, I would say those are two really good spots to look at. Obviously, work from, Mintel, as far as like broad category insights is always really great. And I would just say honestly, there's a ton of places to find this information. I think if you just Google it, you'll be able to learn more. I think the biggest thing is just investing the time to read as much as possible. And that's when you'll start kind of starting to see some of the connections. And now that we're kind of, for the most part, in a place with COVID where we can see each other in person, highly encourage people going to conferences. There's nothing that will, I think this is a great format for getting to know each other and socializing information, but there's always something special about seeing each other in person.
Absolutely agree. And, we love these. We started this actually at the start of the pandemic so that we could keep the education going, and we're happy to keep it going, but also we do love meeting everybody in person. We had some fun at Expo West and Supply Side, so it is great to be back. So we're about ready to wrap up, but I just want to see if you have any key takeaways. What do you want to leave us with today?
I think the key takeaways is that retail health is going to start changing kind of our retail shopping environment in some pretty substantial ways. I think from a microbiome perspective, you really want to think about who are going to be some of the category leaders and disruptors that are based in science with clean labels, good supply chains, and partner with those and really help those brands in store, because that's what's going to, I think there really is going to be an outsized driver effect, an 80-20 of when you have the right brands in your store, in your sets, whether it's digestive health, metabolic, the VMS part of the store. It's gonna drive a lot more people coming into the store, and then to think about you need to start developing what your retail health strategy is going to be, whether it's going to be something very light touch, like maybe having a Higgy kiosk, or just having health coaches in the store or in-store nutritionists or dietitians to help your customers find the right things, or going fully high touch by offering testing and other type of like primary care type of services. But have a strategy. Otherwise, unfortunately, I think you'll start to be behind the power curve. So
right, because there are plenty of brand stores out there that do have their strategies, so we have to make sure we're staying on top of it. So thank you for educating us on all the latest, everything that's coming out there. Important to know what the competition is doing and what the opportunities are. So we appreciate the update. Thank you, Noah.